thinking, if you throw a subject like Kampala to an artist back in 98, what would they have come up with? Yeah, so for me, this is very important, I think, because this degree of interrogation definitely takes us to deeper places about our own consciousness as a people and as creative people. So I'm really, really, really very, very honored to be here. Lloyd, I'll start with you. Residencies take up a lot of your time and energy. Why? Why did you agree to do this?
I think the reason I took it was a lot of, like you said, it takes up a lot of time and energy, but a lot of the work that I've been able to produce in the last few years that I have been proud of has been the result of residencies, has been the result of people identifying that I may have something to offer. I'm willing to facilitate that process because as artists, it's very hard to find, for lack of a better term, patrons who are willing to support you and without any real tangible strings attached. And so it's different if you are looking for a job or to try to create something, but you're under someone's instruction and they are instructing you on how to do something or what to produce. But there have been certain spaces, like you mentioned, Tiberia Arts Foundation, and very much during this residency, Afriart Gallery, where they facilitate you and they say, go play and have the freedom to produce something. We will give you guidance where needed, but more or less, we want to allow you to be you. So that is the why. And it's very interesting that you talk about public spaces, or we're talking about public spaces because public spaces means spaces that are accessible and that you're allowed to be. And likewise, I found that in the art realm, there are very few spaces where I've been allowed to just be. And Afriart Gallery has been one of those spaces. So that is the why.
Rebecca, what's your reason for agreeing to this?
Hey, so I am a very curious person, and I think coming out of school when you realize how ignorant I am, and I wanted to explore all these curiosities that I had, questions whose answers I couldn't find in school, and also the question of my self-identity as an artist, as a creator, but also as a human being living in a country or belonging to a country. What does it mean to be Ugandan? What does it mean to be an artist? What kind of artist am I? So having opportunities like this one to just go explore your curiosity.
How did you arrive at the idea of public space or rest places and public places? Why? And why are you looking for that in Kampala?
I think it was an issue of identity. It started from acknowledging our identity crisis as Ugandans, given the fact that we are young people trying to make sense of our existence in this time and space. If you look at the life experience of an average Ugandan, you spend 90% of your time in school. So, okay, I'm done going through primary school, secondary school, university, and now I'm out into the world. And that's when I start using the public spaces actively, because now I'm not in the comforts and confines of school, and I'm now a human being left to find their path and themselves, and moving through the city. What is the city like? What's the fabric of the city? Where do I fit in the city? And those questions led to, okay, where can I breathe in the city?
Lloyd, What I find interesting about this residency and the pairing is that you have a writer, and you have an architect, visual artist, and you're working together. There's a word synergies there, right? For you, what were you looking for? Why did you arrive at this idea?
I found her take and her entry point into the residency very interesting for a number of reasons. I think, and this is a conversation I have been having with numerous people over the past few years, this idea that our generation, maybe not specifically, but particularly right now in this moment, seem to be in the grips of a very, very deep identity crisis. And that a lot of the people who I am engaging with and having the same conversation with happen to be residents of Kampala. And so I think my entry point and my interest started with the idea, is there a correlation between the fact that we exist in this city and our sense of or lack of identity? And so that is really where my entry point and my interest started from, and where I started doing my digging into the subject matter. And I think, like you said, there's a disparity between how we referred to our subject matter or labeled them. For her, it was rest spaces. Mine was public spaces. I think there is a place where they coalesce, but I think myself, the public space talks about or reflects or is close to the idea of accessibility. And just the idea that so many of things that should be accessible to everyone oftentimes seem not to be. And spaces and places and things that I have felt through time should be accessible to me have been denied to me. And therefore, because they've been denied to me, have given me a sense of unrest and restlessness. And so that's why I felt those two things met. And so there was a deep correlation. So while there is unrest, there's a sense of unrest, and the spaces that we should have access to, that should provide rest, don't seem to. Does that, just the examination of the aspects of that is really, really what interested me and has taken me on this journey.
How do you then begin to frame you already told us about how you frame your program, but how then do you begin to build the program? How you going to do it? Do you just, I've seen some pictures where you're walking on the streets, but how did you tackle this?
When we submitted for the residency, of course, there are many applicants, and then they choose the two. And I think it was very interesting. I don't know what the criteria was, but when I met with Rebecca, it became clear that we were put together for a reason. And we had a lot of same interests, both artistically, both in aesthetically, and different things, and the things that we're trying to or attempting to pursue through our work. I think that was one thing. And then I very much took my lead from Rebecca, and really what was placed on her heart as from a design perspective, and her background. And so we went into this city tour it was an explorative thing. And one of the things, like she mentioned, that I found very interesting, the thing that caught my eye about these different spaces was the history of these spaces. And as I mentioned before, that these were meant to be public spaces or spaces of rest, but oftentimes they're not that accessible. And when you hear the history of the spaces, they were full of turmoil and unrest. And so it led me to thinking about, is it possible that our current state of unrest and identity crisis is rooted in the past. And when I started looking at the research or hearing the stories about these different spaces, it confirmed that. Because, for example, going back to the name Kampala coming from Impala and the hunting grounds, I realized that, yes, that's where the name came from. But these hunting grounds were when the British came to occupy, was the Kabaka's favorite hunting grounds were given to the British, and that soon became the place where Fort Lugard was built. And of course, Fort Lugard, it became too small for its occupants, and so they had to spread out. And that is how, without much of a plan, Kampala ended up spreading out across the different hills. And what I found interesting about that is post-independence, when Idi Amin came into power, he looked at Fort Lugard and said, no, 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 no. This is not going to do. So he tore down the fort and he started work. He broke ground on a mosque. But because of the instability of the time, this mosque was never completed until the 90s, and our current president made alliances with Libya, and the mosque was completed in 2004, and that is what we know as the Gaddafi Mosque. So just looking at this one spot and how the different transitions of power are reflected on the buildings that have been there, or the structures that have been there, caught my interest. And so I started looking at other places around the city where you could trace back. And I think it was interesting to see that I could look at these public spaces, or unintended or intentional rest spaces, and I could tell the story or read the history of Kampala through these spaces.
About Kampala city itself, as you walk through the city, what was the experience? I mean, I had my own experience walking through the city. I mean, there was surprise. I was also struck by the beauty of some of the buildings there, and how they managed to recreate these rich lives within these little spaces. Kampala is small simply because Mengo wouldn't allow the British to take any more. And the British didn't have enough military force to take more, right? So the design of this city has fascinated me, but I want to hear it from you and how it makes you feel as a human being.
Okay, so my approach to the whole project, and I think the perspective with which I see life, is very experiential. It occurred to me how much I had not internalized a lot of experiences, because the times that I was in Kampala, I was just in motion. And then this one time during a workshop, we were given an exercise to walk for at least an hour in silence through Kampala. That's when I started to observe. So we walk from Zai Plaza to...
This is Luwum Street, is it?
Yes,
is it?
That side.
The one where traffic is not supposed to be allowed? Right, okay.
Then
the back of it is Chiembelen, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
just for those who don't go to the city.
Orientation.
I'm a city boy.
So we walk through up to the National Theatre, but throughout our movement, since we're not talking with each other, we're not distracted by our own voices, and now we're paying attention to what the city sounds like. We're not really engaging, because we're four people, we're not engaging with each other, so we're actually observing what's going on around us. We're seeing people, we're seeing markets, we're seeing the roads, we're seeing the streetways, and walking through. I think that's where my curiosity for rest spaces started, actually. We're like, okay, I'm sweating, it's so hot. It is so hot. Where can I sit? And you cannot stand to take shade in front of someone's business because they want customers. Are you buying? You're not. Can you move
right.
and leave room for the customer? And you cannot think to go into a restaurant because it's a very curated space. Also, again, you have to purchase to stay there. So there was this intangible tension while we were walking through, and this strive. and everyone in the city is just moving about fast, fast. Like everyone is just busy, motion, motion, motion. So when you actually take a moment to pause, is when you realize, okay, where am I? What is going on here? Is when you see all the chaos. Not to say it's necessarily bad, because the other thing was realizing how beautiful, the beauty in the chaos was people thriving in this environment. And the downside of it was, okay, what is actually going on here? So there was just that harshness to things, and the city did not have room to breathe, neither did it provide room to breathe. And I think that stuck in my mind, and I was like, okay, what is there, like, okay, if I couldn't find it here, where can I find a shed to just be, where can I find a shed to stay away from the harsh sun? Where can I find a stool to put my body down, because I have been moving and I'm actually exhausted? So those questions and that experience, which was universal to the team that had gone, it's after taking a moment to observe that we realize how harsh the city was. And it looks like a lot of times we don't internalize our experiences because we're in motion. We don't get the time to actually see what's happening, or what's happening to us, or what we're feeling.
My entry point into the story that I am writing is the idea that we do need to look to the past. We cannot change the past, but we can look to it to contextualize our present, because we cannot change the future or attempt to change the future if we don't understand these other things. But sort of taking a leaf from what you said about destroying, rebuilding, I probably would do the same thing. Because the structures that are in place across multiple spaces, whether it's sociological, political, infrastructural, all of those other things are a different conversation, but let's focus on the infrastructural, would be to tear down because they don't reflect who we are, and look to the past so that we can rebuild. So looking at the way our communities were formed before, both at the nuclear level, at the clan level, at the village level, and so forth. And I think we could take hints and clues from that in order to create spaces that are accommodative to us as individuals, to our culture, to our history, and to our identity. And so that is, in short, what I would do. Whether that is feasible, like you said, is a completely different question.
We can dream.
Yeah, we can dream. And that is sort of the biggest question mark at the end, is that I feel like I have an answer, but is the answer really a feasible solution? And it sort of puts it in the hands of the people who have the book in their hands as to what is the solution, because I cannot do it alone. She cannot do it alone. But maybe as a community, we can rebuild our community. Yes.
If you were to rebuild Kampala, to redesign it, what would you do?
The question of how would I rebuild Kampala is very conflicting, in that I appreciate the hybridity of our current culture and identity, that we're a blend of global influences and all the things that we picked up from the colonialists that we have now. I mean, look at us.
Yeah, here we are.
Speaking English and wearing the clothes that we are wearing. I appreciate aspects of it, while I also appreciate aspects of our dying cultures. Because while, for example, our parents appreciate hosting relatives in your city home, the children don't. So it's interesting, the mindsets that the difference between the mindsets now and of generations before us. But where the opportunity comes is for a project like this, where we can have these conversations.
Yes, yes.
Because I think there's also, again, a lack of understanding or appreciation for certain things because there's just general ignorance of them. Because people have not, a lot of younger generations have not got that opportunity to grow up in that clan setting that our parents did, that they appreciated so much and that they want with us. Again, because we are spending most of our times in school and we do not have an idea of what that is like. We have a very colonial missionary style education idea of what family is like. So bringing up our past and what life was then, I think makes the difference in letting people broaden their understanding of what family can be, of what space can be. Because even with, I'm very interested in the layout of our houses. Even with adaptation of Western foods, we still enjoy our native meals, and the preparation of them requires a certain kind of space.
How would you design a kitchen for me?
I think I would also still consider all those layers of history to design a space that can accommodate for the Ugandans we are today, who are still rooted in our clans, but very global at the same time.
The future, what would you like to see?
I feel like looking at the future as a utopia. To jump off from what she said, there are certain things that the occupiers did bring that have added value to our existence, and we cannot negate that fact. I think it would be to use the word that is sort of the basis of this whole residency. I think the utopian way to go about it would be to provide a synergy between the past and the present, to create a future that acknowledges where we have come from, both in terms of what has been brought, but also a reclamation of partially what has been lost. And this would, of course, be at different levels. Again, we are talking at an infrastructural level, but I think the utopian idea of that would be, of course, like you mentioned, the growth of Kampala. Its infrastructure was informed by other factors, political, military, the military and whatnot. So how do we find a fusion and a synergy of all aspects of society that recognizes and recognizes the two seemingly conflicting cultures? And I think, again, that's where the fracture is that we're at war, or these two different seemingly contradictory things are at war with one another. Is there a way to provide and come up with a synergy? I don't know. But that is my utopian idea of what the future would look like. We engage with one another, but